Welcome, everybody, to Sippin' and Shippin'. I'm your host, Brian Weinstein. We'll be kicking it here every other Friday, quenching your thirst for an insider's take to enhance your customer experience. So grab your drink of choice, kick back, it's Sippin' and Shippin' time. All right, welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sippin' and Shippin'. I am your host, Brian Weinstein, and with me, Caitlin Postal.
That's right, I'm here. What's up, Brian? How are you?
I know you're here because I can see you. You can't hide. You can run, but you can't hide. So we have a guest with us this week, Brian Tigner from Authentic Innovations. How are you, Brian?
I am good, but I bet the weather is better there than here. It's rainy and about 40 out in Ohio.
Oh no. We had a deluge over the weekend, 5+ inches of rain. It's been pretty not great recently. I don't know when this episode is going to air, but for this past weekend, it was just not good.
Gross here out on Long Island. Nasty, cold. I'm ready for some sunshine on the weekend.
That's what happened? We had 90+ degrees like 2 weeks ago.
They faked us out. They lied.
I was all set. I had the covers off the patio furniture. I was living the outdoor life, and then suddenly it all returned back to the bipolar springs that we seem to have year over year.
Gross.
Yeah, done with it. All right, so today one of the topics that seems to come up for us a lot with brands that we speak to are ones that they're thinking about getting into personalization of any kind, whether that's embroidery, embossing, engraving, or any others. So Brian, before we dig into that, why don't you give the audience a little bit of a background on yourself and little history, little Tigner history.
Well, we'll try to make it brief. I don't know that you want my whole life history, so I'll try to condense this down to what's
start from when you were 5. Let's just start from kindergarten.
Probably my earliest memory. Yeah, sledding down a hill, pulling a toboggan down over my face because the snow was blinding me as we were going down this hill, and I was certain that my father was taking me down a hill I shouldn't be going down at 5. Nonetheless, here we are today, and we've made it this far at least. So a lot of my background is in manufacturing originally. Spent a lot of time in engineering in a variety of different roles for a variety of different companies, primarily focused on products. And as my career went along, kind of in a twist of fate, I ended up in personalization. And what we call personalization is essentially every order is unique. Every unit within that order is unique. We're not decorating it with, a standard design. We're decorating it with a design that may have, text or something that makes it unique. And really, it's kind of what we've seen over the course of the last 10 years in the industry that, people are kind of leaning towards making things more personal versus, like wearing something that has a branded logo on it.
Yeah, and that changes a lot, right? I mean, so the dynamics of, I guess, maybe 20 years ago in the space where you're producing 500 of the same embroidered patch or engraving of some kind. I mean, that's a completely different animal than getting into the personalization market, right?
Yeah, so, obviously as technology's improved, it's made it more feasible to do it at scale. 10 years ago, talking about, making every single order unique was just nearly an impossible feat at any kind of scalable model for a retailer who was national. Obviously regional in many cases could be managed, but at a national level, not manageable. So that technology has improved dramatically. And I work for a company that invested quite a bit of money since 2008 in a personalization model that allowed them to take order intake in a specific way that would allow the operation team to automate the entire back end of the process, essentially scan a barcode and be able to drop down from a server that exact design on that exact product, and then have an image that would show what the product is as well as what the design is supposed to be on it, because you have to be able to QA it, right? At the end, you got to verify what the customer's going to get is what they ordered. So those were, 10 years ago, that was a very difficult thing to do and a very expensive proposition to try to get, custom code written. But nowadays, that's become more feasible. Obviously as technology's improved, resources have been put into trying to come up with what's new and certainly what's what the consumer wants out in the marketplace. So
Right.
obviously, we get a wide gamut of customers that come in and want different types of decorating. Some of them want what we call customization. They take a singular design. They may change the color of the design, but they don't necessarily change the design.
Right.
And so if that's in print, obviously digitally, it's easy to change colors. If it is in screen print, that's not quite as easy to change colors because you're kind of limited to how many colors you can run. If it's in embroidery, it means you're changing over a lot of thread colors. So it's, a lot of changeover costs involved in that.
Yeah, and Bryce, sorry to interrupt, but when we're talking about this, now you started, the company I think you're referring to is a direct marketing company, right? So it was
Correct.
a little bit, I don't want to say, it didn't obviously predate e-commerce orders, but it was probably before the technology was there for e-commerce. So that sort of lets you see the infancy stage of getting that individual personalized order. And then, so out in advance of e-commerce where it's really starting to grow and take traction. So what kind of steps, you were still getting there was still the Jane Doe and the Bill Blass who were ordering the individual items and wanted personalization. What kind of steps were you taking then versus now in order to accomplish handling the individual orders without having a tremendous backlog?
Yeah, I mean, back then, 10 years ago, we would collect a lot of the information on interfaces for the customer that had like drop down selectable list that we could then, correlate into a work order. Nowadays, it's all automated. It's not handled at all internally. Essentially, the interface allows the customer to see what they're going to get. So they actually can view their personalization or their design on the product before they even order it.
Right.
10 years ago, that wasn't in the marketplace. It didn't exist.
When did 10 years ago become a long time, by the way? Because I have pictures on my iPhone from even longer ago, and I still own the clothes that I'm wearing in that picture from 10 years ago.
10 years ago was 2013. I could do the math, Brian, barely. But when I think of 10 years ago, I'm like, yeah, early 2000s, late 90s. I was a kid.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, technology is moving so fast, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to keep up with. And, 10 years is a lifetime out in the Silicon Valley. So that's kind of, we've been a benefactor of a lot of that, improving our industry as well. And, at the end of the day, we feel like we've kind of come to a point where we're now able to start to talk to other companies to give them some of the information and give them some of the technology that we benefited from, but on a smaller scale and make it more affordable. And that's essentially what we're trying to do, is we're trying to come up with a solution, customer-based solution, that allows them to integrate to us in an affordable manner and then give them good, production pricing, not the kind of pricing that you would receive in a small mom and pop shop, but,
Right.
production related pricing that you're going to receive based on the fact that we're able to spread our cost over so many more units.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds like you were ahead of the curve, 10 years ago, and you say a few different words, right? We talk about personalization, which to me, when I think of personalization, I think when I go onto a site and they're collecting all of my data and what I'm looking at, and they're pushing me, different based on what my preferences are. This is personalized. Then you talk about decorating, and then you talk about customization. And I guess 10 years ago, you weren't getting that. They weren't picking it up on the iPhone that I was shopping for my nephew, Aiden. But now when I'm scrolling through Instagram, there it is. His initial, Aiden S, and my niece and nephew, their names on a nameplate. My mind is blown. No one can see, but I'm doing explosion head emoji. And how do you make that kind of leap to get from where you're doing select down drops, options, to being able to really decorate and customize? And I know that's a loaded question, Brian, but how are you able to stay on top of that progression and the want to? And I know it's people use it all the time, but to surprise and delight folks, to be able to add that level of personalization.
Well, I think, particularly for the company that I have worked for, really was very customer centric. So it was easy for us to continue to keep innovating.
Sure.
You mentioned a topic that really is super important. Is really what we're seeing now is the innovation less on the back end, right? Like that's kind of solved for at this point. There's quite a few companies out there that offer workflow solutions beyond the one that, our company had developed that are now more canned and out of the box. But what now the innovation has turned to your point, is more about, targeted marketing and being able to create an interface that not only interacts in real time with the consumer, but also allows the consumer to not have to think as hard or be as creative.
Yeah.
But, the technology is created for them. So example, you mentioned, that you're often targeted your, you say niece, nephew?
Yeah, anything I say, really. I mean, it's kind of scary, but yeah.
It is. You automatically see their initials on the product, which is one of the things that we're seeing companies do, right? Like they're creating their interface for their customer so that when their customer comes on, they either are collecting a customer profile, by metadata that they're purchasing from a company who's collecting it from your online usage, or they are collecting it up front when you enter their website. They may ask you just a small list of questions, and through their small list of questioning, they're able to then customize their entire website specifically to you. So everything would have a CP on it or a CMP on it, so that when you view their
He got
products,
the middle initial. He's getting creepy. This is a customized guy.
Yeah. I pay attention to details. So
As you should.
nonetheless, it really is about marketing the product in a way that makes it more consumable. But, the world today is quicker, faster, better, right?
Right.
Everything has to be quicker, faster, better. And no one wants to spend time shopping, all day to find one present. Everybody wants to jump online. They want quick, easy access to, something that's meaningful. Obviously, when you personalize something, it makes it more meaningful, makes it more personal as I give it to you for a gift. So we think about those things as we're designing our technology.
So, Brian, when you're speaking to a brand, for example, if you're going to give them guidance, what are some of the things that they should consider? It could be thread colors, stitch counts, something on the embossing or engraving side. Like, what are some of the things that they should be considering when they're making a decision to either offer that out to on their website or not?
Removing a pocket, maybe.
Yeah. Caitlin's referring to a recent one that we were working on. But I think, for me, when we talk to some of these brands, I want to make sure that the solution that we're creating is the right solution for them based on what their mission is. If their mission is innovation, then I'm going to likely come back with a lot of solutions that is going to put them on the forefront of like some of the cutting edge technology that we're working on, i.e. we're creating inks that have monochromatic characteristics. So essentially there is monochromatic thermal ink, there is monochromatic hydro ink, there is even just hydrochromatic ink, which allows you to be able to, like, as an example, take a beach towel. It says one thing when it's wet and it says something else when it's totally dry. Right. So now your personalization or customization, your design is more dynamic than static. Right. So that's something I would suggest to a company who is coming in and really is trying to get on the cutting edge of personalization. Somebody who's trying to add on, some personalizable feature to products that they already offer, and maybe they have already created a brand around, and they just feel as though, by making them more personal, they become more giftable. In that case, simpler is better, right? At the end of the day, this can be an expensive proposition if you let it. It can be as complicated or as simple as you might expect. But really, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're just wanting to make it personal and giftable, go with a few colors, go with just a few designs. Try not to make your interface too complicated and frustrate your customer, because that's not what they expect when they get onto your site. Right. Whereas when they get onto a site that's expected to be innovative, they want their mind to be blown, right? But when they're just trying to add something on to make it giftable, simpler is better.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it reminds me of our second episode, Brian, where we had Robert Escobar and we talked about personalization and starting, considering when you're a startup, that handwritten note is nice. But now when you're doing 50,000 orders a month, are we calling Brian Tigner to get that machine that's going to write the name for us? Are we going to scrap it? What is the cost ramification for things like this? Brian Tigner, where do you step in and draw the line or give brands guidance, to Brian's point, on scalability of some of these ideas? Because it sounds awesome in theory, but how do you execute and what's the cost to come along with that?
Yeah, I mean, often I think we found best policies just to be transparent. And Brian and I often talk about this, that, what people want, what brands want is partners. They want people who are not going to put them in a ditch, but are going to give them realistic timelines, realistic expectations, give them realistic pricing, so that they know what they're getting themselves into. Like I said, innovation is an expensive proposition when you're being first to the market. And that's probably stands true for any industry, right? Not just in personalization, but any technology that you're going to develop will take time and there'll be trial and error. I think that drawing the line is up to the brand. It's not up to me where they want to take their brand. It's up to us to offer up solutions, be realistic, and be a good partner with them.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. So it sounds like just that transparency is key, and then they can relate that back into their cost per order, cost per unit, and make the decision like, does this make sense? Will this really drive that experience?
And having been in the industry for so long, we've built a lot of partnerships with a lot of different companies. We can often guide them by giving them resources to allow them to go do research on their own, to draw their own conclusions, come back and consult with us. But, to help guide their path, we don't necessarily take them, from point A to point B. We more or less point out what all the options are. And if you get down this intersection, these are resources that are going to help you guide yourself along the way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I mean, it's a complicated decision, I think, for any brand to say, hey, okay, we're now going to be able to offer this. What would be a suggested timeline? So if we're a brand and we're deciding to go this personalization route, how much runway should they leave themselves from like sort of the concept inception to when they can actually bring this live? Like what kind of runway are you typically looking at for that?
Well, I'll contextualize the answer first and then answer it.
Perfect.
But as you know, everyone, when they start out on the journey, don't always have the end in mind. And if they do, there's a lot of twists and turns along the way. So companies really, as they start to formulate their order management system, the methodology or the architecture they use to create it often dictates how easily or hard it's going to be to integrate with, a personalization workflow system. So if you got a bigger business, then they have put, a lot of thought into their architecture and, have made significant investment in doing so, then, the turn time for integration can be as little as, we've done a turn time with a customer here recently, and it was probably like, I don't know, maybe 8 weeks, but fairly sophisticated.
Right.
They had good resources on the other end of the phone who understood their system and could code or pass through an API the information that we need in order for us to be able to create the workflow on our side as efficiently as possible. But then I've had customers where they didn't have a good handle on their order management system or they're working off spreadsheets, and we had to start from scratch, and that can take 6 months.
Right.
So I'd say probably anywhere from 8 weeks to 6 months is a typical integration, depending on how complex you want to get. Now, if you're starting from scratch and you don't even have a front end, I think you're probably looking more at like 8 months to a year to be able to fully integrate, right? Because you have to be able to collect information in order to be able to give it to us for our workflow. And that collection point has to be developed and it has to be branded. There's obviously out-of-the-box solutions for that. And if you're willing to conform, your business to some of these out-of-the-box solutions, then, that timeline gets condensed and your cost gets condensed. But if you want to customize those solutions, then, obviously that's where the expense and the timelines begin to extend.
Right. Yeah. That's good information because, we deal with so many brands that are entrepreneurial spirits and have entrepreneur leadership who want to be able to like turn on a dime and say, this is what we need. This is what our customer base is looking for. But it's not always that simple. And I would imagine the one that you were talking about that was more sophisticated may have even come from a different provider. And they had done this in the past, whereas some of these others are starting completely from scratch.
You got it. Yeah.
The marketer and product growth, October 1st. We're going to do customized jammies this year. We have photo shoots at Thanksgiving time. We better get this up and running. But by the way, we only are on Shopify.
Yes.
Exactly.
Let's get started.
Exactly. And so, Brian, do you see a lot of the brands that you deal with, are they charging back to the customer? I mean, is it almost 100% pass through? What's sort of the industry trend that you're seeing with the brands versus what you're charging them?
Well, and I think that partially depends on the model. So some customers we have are commercial customers who are doing C2C transactions, right? Or B2B transactions rather.
Yep.
That kind of, I guess, changes the way that it works. So if it's a, B2C transaction, then, often what we find is the transition's much smoother because they can dictate to themselves a lot of how they're going to market to their customer.
Right.
Whereas if it's, B2B, often what happens is some of that's being dictated to them.
Right.
So I guess it's somewhat contingent upon, how they're set up and what their model is and who their customer is.
Yeah. And there's a give and take when it's B2B, I would imagine too, because for you, having more volume of the same embroidery or whatever the item is will allow you to lower the price, but at the same time they can pass that along as, hey, you can get this from us just blank as is, add this on, it'll be this much, and I would imagine they're pretty much passing that along at a cost.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if it's a B2B relationship, then more often than not, it's an industry that they know. And it's an industry that probably has MOQs, or they have competitors that have MOQs, and they're either trying to carve out a niche where they don't have the MOQs, or they're offering something that differentiates them from, their competitor.
Right.
And so, we try to work with them on solutions, but not all solutions are the same, right? Like every solution for every customer has to be different. Obviously, it'd be great to make them all conform to one solution. I know we'd all love to live in that world.
Right.
But that one doesn't exist.
Right.
It does, but it's a microcosm of where we want to be.
Right.
So I think in the end, we find success when we offer options to our customers and ensure that our pricing models fit their business and their process. And usually there's an answer, right? At the end of the day, sitting down with them and being transparent about what our real costs are almost always ends in a success story, because all they want to know is they got a partner on this side who's going to be transparent with them and is going to work with them towards the same end goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And so our brands are very driven by their customer promise and the delivery time SLAs that they put out to market. What would you recommend? And I guess maybe we'll go with embroidery. What would you recommend a brand build into their SLAs in terms of time? Obviously there's going to be the transit time. Yeah. The warehouse needs to pick the order, pack the order. But just wondering, from a standpoint of actually having the personalization completed, what should they be building into their SLAs?
Obviously, a lot of things go into that, as you know, and obviously everyone wants a starting point. So typically what we use as a starting point is 72 hours. So
Okay.
From the time an order is delivered to us from the warehouse, we'll process that order and put it back or give it back to the warehouse to ship, or we'll ship it on the customer's account within 72 hours. Now, having said that, there are customers who want, 12-hour, 24-hour services, in which case we offer those. More often than not, what we try to do is keep things simple and not, start creating layers and layers of pricing based on, all these different variables that we're all trying to live through. To be a good partner, we don't want to create, an accounting empire on their side or ours.
Yes.
Trying to manage, all these kind of nuances. So we try to factor in some of this variability into our initial pricing model and say, hey, look, our SLA is going to be 72 hours. Your cost is going to be based on usually two variables, your units per order and your total volume for a month. And we try to keep it simple in that way so that we're not trying to, price out every single unit based on, what its workflow was.
Yeah, and I think like any service provider, right? You're battling a little bit of spikes and volumes. I mean, to your point, you can have 12 hours as an SLA, but if then you're either you could wind up as the provider with people sitting around not having any work, or you could have more work than you can get through in a 12-hour period just through either machine limitations or staffing limitations based on forecasts being exceeded. So it's always tricky. And I can't even imagine around the holidays how that spike. I mean, I can imagine because we're in the 3PL space as well. But you're limited to the number of heads that you have in terms of embroidery, for example.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the benefit of really using our model, us having worked on a relationship with your team and being able to put our business inside of your business gives us a lot of opportunities for us to level load our scheduling. So even if a customer has a valley in their demand, we're often able to level load that with another customers. And we try to be strategic, right, and find customers that have different peaks in seasonality so that we can level load that and not have to, spread that cost, that fixed, what's variable becomes fixed in terms of labor over, a fewer number of units. So it definitely gives us the opportunity to do that based on the model we have. And that's kind of the differentiator between us and probably a lot of other decorators is because we're being partnered up, we're having the opportunity to do that where others don't.
Yeah. Anytime you could flatten those spikes, it's certainly helpful to an operation.
Yeah, it sounds like very similar to us when we understand a brand's peak, just getting in front of it, understanding what those volumes look like and setting the expectation so that we're equally obsessed with their end user, right? They are our customer, but what's the expectation so that we're not missing that? Especially to your point earlier, Brian, it was like, this is something special. I went the extra step. I got your name on it. I got the initials on it, a little emoji, whatever the case is. So I think people are more forgiving in that way because it is a little bit extra special. Right now, it seems like
Auntie Caitlin, are you going to mention your niece and nephew's names again?
No, I've already gotten six adverts of what I could buy from them. One of them is from 31 Gifts, so thank you for that. I'll have that order in 72 hours, says Brian Signer. Embroidery seems to be top of mind for a lot of apparel brands. I know you've been in this space and your organization has been in this space for a long time. So you guys do an array of things. I was super impressed to see the different offerings, tote bags, logos, handwritten messages in the right font. It looks like someone's writing. What else is out there? What's coming next in personalization? And Brian, jump in as well. Maybe you have something on this.
So what we're investigating, he's got nothing. What we're investigating next for personalization are things like, as I mentioned, different types of ink. So there's, hydrochromatic ink, thermochromatic ink. There's a lot of different. Right now, a lot of focus is on, I don't know if you ever heard of DTF, but direct to film. Essentially, what you're doing is you're printing not on the product itself, but you're printing onto a plastic sheet. They call it a transfer paper. Essentially, then you are heat pressing that onto a product. But the adhesives have become so sophisticated and, with technology have become so good that they are equivalent in terms of their durability to like screen printing, which has kind of traditionally been, the go-to technology for any kind of, like garment printing. So the reason that's kind of been on the forefront is because everybody wants to move more towards a customizable model. Screen printing is limited on the number of colors that you can have. And so this offers as many colors as you can put onto a digital file. And then the cost of it is so inexpensive. But some of the things that they're doing also in that space is they're coming up with reflective inks that really, like as an example, a child might put a reflective ink on their backpack. Not because they want a reflective ink, because mom and dad wants a reflective ink so that when they're out walking the street, they have, an extra layer of safety protection. But those are kind of things that they're working on. Other interfaces that we're working on is like handwriting. So we can take your handwriting, digitize that handwriting in just one order, and then send you, as an example, if you wanted to put a note to your grandchild on a baby blanket, and I wanted that to become heirloom quality. We could take your handwriting, we can embroider your handwriting, but when we do it, we're obviously not paying somebody to set and stitch,
Right.
one stitch at a time. What we're doing is we're using a CNC machine and some technology that auto digitizes that.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That ink that you're talking about, that when it's wet, it shows one thing and dry another. I would have been screwed as a kid because, like, my mom, like, if you were wet, you couldn't go in the house. And if we want to go in and get a snack, and she'd be like, "Don't you go in that house if you're wet." And I'm like, "I'm not wet." And then I can sneak in, but now they can actually give you shorts where they can see whether or not you're wet.
Yeah.
Get sprayed by the hose. Don't come in the house, you jerk. It says on the back of them.
Exactly.
One of the
Wet, Mom?
other kind of cutting edge technologies that are out there that we're also looking into is trying to defeat the problem of thread changeover for embroidery. So there are companies out there now that are essentially taking the technology that we're using to print with, and they're applying it to the thread coloring. So they're coloring the thread on demand.
Oh, wow.
So as it's being, so all thread comes in white, gets loaded into this machine. This machine sets over top of your embroidery machine. And as the digital file comes into the machine, it colors the thread. What that allows you to do, which we could never do before in embroidery, is you would be able to do pictures, embroider literally a picture onto a product, because changing from one color to the next requires you to be able to tie. And most commercial embroidery machines only have about 15 needles. So you're limited to 15 colors. So this allows you to have infinite number of colors without any stops, and allows you to really control your purchasing and really reduce your costs on the opposing side of, the operation by only having white thread come in versus, right now we got 500-600 thread colors in our inventory.
What is the timing of a technology like that? Is that something that's still 5-8 years out, or is this something that's sooner than that?
Oh no, yeah, they have it. There's a couple companies doing it right now.
Okay.
And most of them are in Europe. They are definitely in production already.
Wow.
And they are readily available. But, the technology is still being improved, like all technology. The iPhone that you have today is not the iPhone that you had 10 years ago, Brian.
Yeah.
Just so you know. You might want to upgrade it.
You mean my BlackBerry that I had 10 years ago?
Yeah, I had BlackBerry too. But anyway, those aren't the same. It's not the same. So the technology is improved, but it's not concise. Really what the dilemma is at the moment is when you change from one color to the next. So imagine this, the digital file has to be registered and indexed to know where it's at in its path as it's kind of like, creating a design. If you have a thread break in the middle of that, it's going to lose where its color registration is, unless it has some way of like backing up and knowing exactly how much thread has passed through and how much thread went onto the product and how much thread was discarded from the product. So that's kind of the dilemma at the moment is they're trying to figure out and perfect really the registration of the color on the product. Once we figure that out, I'm sure that will happen. It's just a matter of time and investment. Once that happens, then, the 500, 600 thread colors that I have in inventory, thousands of dollars worth of thread will be obsolete overnight.
Right.
Unreal.
Yeah.
Makes sense, though.
You wouldn't, it's just amazing the amount of innovation. So as an outsider who's not been in embroidery his entire life, you're like, it's embroidery. I mean, how much innovation is there really going to be? But just that, I never thought about being able to embroider a picture and not just like a logo or some sort of, it's really, really insane the amount of innovation that's going into the market. Well, Brian, I really appreciate you coming on. This was super enjoyable one, because I always like talking with you, but just really the information I think that's out that you brought out there for our audience, who in some cases we're seeing more and more of this as a demand. I think it's going to be super helpful to them as they're starting their journey down this personalization route. So thank you very much.
Great to spend
Caitlin, you want to walk us out?
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Brian Tigner and our partners, Authentic Innovations. Make sure you tune in every other Friday on sippinandchippin.com or on your favorite podcast platform. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.